only friends we have are the mountains, Kurdish proverb. Kurdistan, land of the Kurds, refer to an area of Kurdish settlement that roughly includes the mountain systems of the Zagros and the eastern extensions of the Taros. Since ancient times, the area has been the home of the Kurds, a people whose ethnic origin are uncertain. For 600 years after the Arab conquest and their conversion to Islam, the Kurds played a recognizable and considerable part in the troubled history of Western Asia, but as tribes, individuals, or turbulent groups rather than as a people. The vast majority of Kurds live in a territory divided among Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Kurdistan is a roughly defined geocultural region where the Kurdish people form a prominent majority population and where Kurdish culture, language, and national identity have historically been based. The Kurds, a stateless nation. The main question here is why the world calls the Kurds the largest nation without a country or a stateless nation. But what is the difference between a state and a nation? So what is a state? State is an independent political unit holding sovereignty over a specific territory. For example, Canada, casually referred to as a country. But on the other hand, what is a nation? A nation is a community of people with common ancestry, culture, and territory. Does not imply an independent political unit, for example, French Quebec, Acadians in Eastern Canada, First Nations throughout Canada, several different nations within the boundaries of the Canadian state. And for another example, we can point at the Arab nation. The territory of the Arab nations extends over several Arab states. But the main question here is, what is a stateless nation? A stateless nation is an ethnic group or a nation that occupies territory but does not belong to a single state. For example, the Basques in Spain and France want autonomy or independency for a Basque state. Kurdistan, on the other hand, is a stateless nation. As is usually the case, boundaries were drawn for political, not ethnographic reasons, and those boundaries divided the Kurdish nation among 4 states. But at the same time, it's really important for us to say what is the difference between a nation and a state. If we want to compare these two together, we can say a nation has single language, common history, similar ethnic background, unity from a common political system, emotional commitment. But on the other hand, a state has clearly delineated territory, substantial population, well-organized government, share political and cultural history, and emotional ties to institutions, political system, and ideology. And now you might ask yourself, so why there is not a Kurdish state? Well, Kurdistan was erased from the world's map after World War I when the Allied powers carved up Southwest Asia and denied the Kurds a state. Contemporary use of the term refers to 4 parts of Kurdistan, which include southeastern Turkey or Bakur, northern Syria or Rojava, northern Iraq or Bashur, and northwestern Iran or Roshalat. Some Kurdish nationalist organizations seek to create an independent state consisting of some or all of these areas with a Kurdish majority, while others campaign for a greater autonomy within the existing national boundaries. For decades, the Kurds looked to the US for support in their struggle against other governments. Washington's response has been classic realpolitik, using the Kurds when it wanted to hurt an opponent and then dropping them when their usefulness had run out. The population of Kurds today is estimated to be 17 million Kurds, all around the world, but the majority of them living in Kurdistan, occupied by 4 dictatorships. There are more than 32 million Kurds in Turkey, more than 18 million Kurds in Iran, 8 million Kurds in Iraq, more than 3 million Kurds in Syria. But there are recognizable Kurds in other countries, mostly European countries. For example, almost 2 million Kurds in Germany, and more than 1 million divided between other European countries, but there are large population of Kurds in other countries. For example, Kazakhstan more than 100,000, Georgia more than 700,000, Armenia 700,000, in Great Israel 700,000, Afghanistan more than 300,000, Pakistan more than 200,000, in Egypt more than 150,000, in Sudan more than 100,000, and at the end in Bosnia and Herzegovina 9,000 Kurds. Kurds, because of discrimination and political problems or being freedom fighters, had to leave their own land and seek refuge in other countries, but we hope to be an end to this madness and Kurdistan be a free and independent country, so all Kurds be able to live side by side of other nations in Middle East. The Kurds are very big on the trappings of statehood. It is as if they're eager to prove that they exist. When you arrive in Hawler in Iraq, immigration officers give your passport a Kurdish stamp. The citadel in Hawler is considered the world's oldest continuously inhabited settlement. The Kurdistan flag consists of 3 horizontal stripes in red, white, and green, with a yellow sun with 21 rays at its center. Number 21 is an important number in the Yazidi faith. It stands for rebirth. The population includes Chaldeans, Assyrians, Syriacs, Turkmen, Yazidis, Arabs, and Kurds living together in harmony. Kurdistan's most prominent geophysical feature is mountains. The mountains are very important to Kurds. They have not only shaped their history, people, tradition, and culture, they have also been used more practically as hideouts for the Kurdish Peshmerga and for guerrillas fighting oppressing regimes. Kurdish domains end abruptly where the plains begin. Iraqi Kurds have their own 175,000-man army, the Peshmerga, which means those who face death. Typically, their arsenal is made up mostly of AK-47 rifles, rocket launchers, surface-to-air missiles, and aging Soviet howitzers. The Kurds have asked Washington for advanced weaponry, but so far have been denied it, probably because of pressures on NATO from the Turks, who have argued that any powerful weapons the Kurds receive might be used later in a war with Turkey.
People are separate. They are linguistically different, they are culturally different from the dominant group in each one of these countries, which are Arab, Turkish, and Persian. The Kurdish people are mostly Muslims. They are moderate. They are secular. They are pro-Western. If you ask every Kurd, they have this dream of having a greater Kurdistan.
And yet, because they were divided at the end of the First World War, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and the borders were drawn at the time by both colonial powers and by the Turks, and because they were a minority in each of these countries, they never succeeded in getting their own state. However, the Kurds never accepted the conditions in which the international community or history put them, and always rebelled. But because they rebelled over the years, they were always a threat to the stability of all these countries.
The Kurdish question is, for the Kurds, this long-term quest to establish their own independence from the countries around them. They've, to date, not succeeded in doing this because of the geopolitics of the region.
In none of these countries, when you look at the history, Kurdish cultural or political identity was recognized. Brutal means of suppression and oppression were deployed to forcibly assimilate the Kurds.
Conditions on the ground are changing everywhere. The Kurds have now become very important actors, thanks to 3 major developments. One is the Iraqi Kurds have achieved a great deal of autonomy in Iraq, and it is autonomy that is recognized internationally, it is recognized by Baghdad. In Syria, we now see that the Syrian Kurds have succeeded in fighting off the Islamic State that has taken over large chunks of territory, both in Syria and Iraq. And the PKK, the Turkish Kurdish insurgent group, are now in the process of historic negotiations with the Turkish government about some kind of a resolution to the Turkish-Kurdish civil war, which started in 1984 and has been quite ferocious. 40,000 people died, mostly Kurds.
The quest for independency is intrinsic to Kurdish identity. However, not all Kurds envision a unified Kurdistan that would span the Kurdish regions of all four countries. Most Kurdish movements and political parties are focused on the concerns and the autonomy or independency of Kurds in their specific country. Within each country, there are also Kurds who have assimilated and whose aspirations may be limited to greater cultural freedoms and political recognitions. The Kurdish issue at its core is simply this: a people with a distinct ethnic heritage aspires to control its own ancestral domains and to be recognized as a state in the modern world. But there is nothing simple about the Kurds. The rise and fall of the ancient Kurdish Empire, the carving up of Kurdish lands after the 20th century world wars, the chronic strife between Kurds and Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria, a series of betrayals by the US over the last several decades, the current factional infighting among Kurds themselves that is perhaps as serious a threat to their future survival as any.